It was a chilly evening in London, the kind where the cold air nipped at your skin, and everyone hurried to get home. Marcus Reed, a tall man in his mid-30s with kind brown eyes, was walking back from his late shift at the community center. He enjoyed helping people, and though the job didn't pay much, it made him feel useful. Marcus always believed the world needed more kindness. As he walked past the busy square, something caught his attention. A man, probably in his 50s, was leaning against a lamppost, his face pale and his hand gripping his chest. His breathing was uneven, and he looked as though he might collapse at any moment. People walked past him, glancing briefly, but not stopping to help. Marcus hesitated for only a second before rushing over. "Hey, are you okay?" he asked gently, crouching next to the man. The man opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. He looked scared, his lips trembling as he tried to steady his breathing. "You're not looking good," Marcus said, concern filling his voice. He quickly scanned the area and spotted a bench nearby. "Let's get you to sit down, all right?" The man nodded weakly, and Marcus carefully helped him over to the bench. "What's your name?" Marcus asked, trying to keep him calm. "Gregory," the man finally managed to whisper. "All right, Gregory," Marcus said with a reassuring smile. "I'm Marcus. I think you're having trouble with your heart. Don't worry, I'll call for help." Marcus pulled out his phone and dialed emergency services. "Hello, I'm at Greenway Square," he told the operator. "There's a man here who seems to be having a heart issue. Please send an ambulance." After hanging up, Marcus turned back to Gregory. "Help is on the way," he said. "Just focus on breathing. In and out, nice and slow." A small crowd began to gather, curious about what was going on. Some people murmured quietly, while others stood with their phones out, recording the scene. Marcus didn't care about the attention. His only focus was Gregory. "Do you have any heart medication?" Marcus asked. Gregory shook his head. "Left it at home," he said between gasps. Marcus frowned, trying to think of what else he could do. He remembered a basic first aid course he had taken years ago. He knelt in front of Gregory, speaking softly to keep him calm. "You're doing great," Marcus said. "Just keep your breathing steady. The ambulance will be here soon." Gregory gave a weak nod. Marcus stayed by his side, watching closely for any changes. Despite the cold evening, sweat dripped from Gregory's brow, and his hands trembled slightly. Marcus couldn't imagine leaving someone in need, no matter how busy the world around him was. As the sound of sirens approached, Marcus felt a wave of relief. Little did he know, this act of kindness was about to take an unexpected turn. The wailing of sirens grew louder, and Marcus breathed a sigh of relief. Help was almost here. Gregory's breathing remained shallow, but Marcus kept talking to him in a calm voice. "Stay with me, Gregory. You're doing fine. The medics will take care of you." A couple of people in the crowd whispered to each other, pointing toward Marcus. He overheard snippets like, "What's going on?" and "Is that man okay?" He ignored them, focusing solely on keeping Gregory conscious. The ambulance turned the corner and parked nearby, its flashing lights illuminating the scene. Two paramedics jumped out and rushed over with their equipment. Marcus stood back to give them space, but stayed close enough to answer questions if needed. "He started struggling to breathe a few minutes ago," Marcus explained quickly. "I helped him to the bench and called you." The paramedics nodded and got to work, checking Gregory's pulse and blood pressure. "Good job staying with him," one of them told Marcus. "You did everything right." Marcus smiled briefly, relieved that Gregory was now in good hands. He thought his part was done, but before he could walk away, two uniformed police officers arrived. They walked briskly toward the scene, their expressions serious. "What's going on here?" one of the officers asked. His sharp tone caught Marcus off guard. "I found this man struggling to breathe," Marcus replied, keeping his voice calm. "I called the ambulance, and they're helping him now." The officer looked him up and down, his eyes narrowing slightly. "We got a report of suspicious activity in this area," he said. "You matched the description we were given." Marcus blinked, confused. "Suspicious activity? I was just helping him. I don't understand." The second officer stepped closer, his hand resting on his belt. "Can you provide identification?" he asked, his voice firm. Marcus reached into his pocket slowly, pulling out his wallet. "Sure, but this is all a misunderstanding," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I haven't done anything wrong." The officer took the ID and glanced at it before looking back at Marcus. "You're saying you just happened to find this man here?" he asked, his tone skeptical. "Yes," Marcus replied. "He was in trouble, and I helped him. You can ask the paramedics. They'll tell you the same." Before Marcus could say more, one of the officers pulled out handcuffs. "We'll need to take you in for questioning," he said. "There's been a complaint, and we need to sort this out." Marcus felt a sinking feeling in his stomach. "Questioning? For what?" he asked, bewildered. "I didn't do anything but help." Some people in the crowd gasped as they saw Marcus being cuffed. A woman shouted, "He was helping. Why are you arresting him?" Grigory tried to protest, but his voice was too weak. The paramedics focused on stabilizing him, unable to intervene. Marcus didn't resist, but he couldn't hide the hurt in his eyes as the officers led him away. The cold metal of the handcuffs pressed against Marcus's wrists as the officers led him to their patrol car. His heart sank, and confusion swirled in his mind. He had only tried to help someone in need. How had it come to this? The murmurs of the crowd followed him as the police guided him away. One woman stepped forward, shouting, "This is wrong. He didn't do anything but help that man." Others murmured in agreement, but the officers ignored them. Marcus kept his head high, even though inside he felt a growing mix of anger and sadness. As the patrol car door closed behind him, Marcus glanced out the window and saw Grigory being loaded into the ambulance. Grigory weakly lifted his hand as if to signal something, but Marcus was already being driven away. The flashing lights of the ambulance disappeared as the car turned a corner, leaving Marcus alone with his thoughts. At the police station, Marcus was escorted into a small gray interrogation room. The walls were bare, and the only furniture was a metal table and 2 chairs. The room smelled faintly of cleaning supplies, making the atmosphere even colder. The officers removed his handcuffs and told him to sit down. "Can you please explain why I'm here?" Marcus asked, his voice calm but firm. "I haven't done anything wrong." The officer across from him leaned forward, his expression unreadable. "We received a report of suspicious behavior in the area. You matched the description. A tall man loitering near the square." Marcus shook his head. "Suspicious behavior? I wasn't loitering. I saw a man in trouble and helped him. You can check with the paramedics." The officer didn't respond immediately. Instead, he scribbled something in his notebook before asking, "How long were you there with the man?" "About 10 minutes, Marcus replied. "He was struggling to breathe, so I called for help. That's it. I don't know what else you're trying to find." The second officer, standing near the door, crossed his arms. "And you didn't notice anything unusual in the area?" Marcus frowned. "No, I wasn't paying attention to anything else. My focus was on helping Grigory." The officers exchanged glances. Marcus could feel their doubt, and it frustrated him. "Listen," he said, his tone firmer now. "You're wasting time questioning me when I've done nothing wrong. The man needed help, and I stepped in. That's the only reason I was there." Meanwhile, back at the square, the crowd was still talking about what had happened. A young man who had filmed the entire incident uploaded the video to social media with the caption, "Man arrested for helping someone. This isn't right." The clip began to spread quickly, sparking outrage online. In the hospital, Grigory woke up, groggy but determined. He asked the paramedics what had happened to Marcus, and when he learned about the arrest, he was horrified. "That man saved my life," he muttered. I have to make this right. At the police station, Marcus sat in the cold, gray interrogation room, his mind racing. He couldn't believe what was happening. He had spent his life trying to do the right thing, yet here he was, being treated like a criminal. He sighed deeply, knowing that explaining himself over and over seemed to fall on deaf ears. One of the officers re-entered the room with a cup of water and set it on the table in front of Marcus. "We're looking into everything," the officer said, though his tone was far from reassuring. "Until we confirm what happened, we'll have to hold you." Marcus frowned. "Hold me for what?" "Helping someone in need." He leaned forward, his voice steady but firm. "I called the ambulance. I stayed by Gregory's side to make sure he was okay. Why can't you see that?" The officer avoided eye contact and left the room without answering. Marcus leaned back in his chair, frustration bubbling inside him. He had never felt so powerless. Meanwhile, back at the hospital, Gregory was recovering. He felt weak but determined. The image of Marcus being handcuffed and taken away haunted him. Gregory pressed the call button for the nurse, who arrived quickly. "I need to speak to the police," Gregory said, his voice shaky but resolute. "The man who helped me, he did nothing wrong. I have to clear this up." The nurse nodded, seeing the urgency in Gregory's eyes. She promised to get in touch with the authorities. Gregory's family, who had arrived at the hospital moments earlier, also supported his plea. His wife, Margaret, looked furious. "This is ridiculous. That man saved your life, Gregory. We'll do whatever it takes to help him." At the same time, the video of Marcus's arrest was spreading rapidly on social media. It showed Marcus kneeling beside Gregory, calling for help, and later being handcuffed by the police. The caption, "Kindness punished. Man arrested for helping a stranger," caught everyone's attention. Comments flooded in. "This is unbelievable. Why arrest someone for helping? Systemic bias at its finest. This needs to stop. Someone get that man released now." Soon, the video reached news outlets, and reporters began digging into the story. The situation was no longer confined to the square. It had become a public issue. Back in the interrogation room, Marcus stared at the clock, counting the hours he had been held. Suddenly, the door opened, and a different officer walked in. He looked uneasy, holding a tablet. "Marcus," the officer began, "a video of your arrest has gone viral. There's been a lot of public outcry. We're reviewing the situation." Marcus raised an eyebrow, his heart pounding. "Does that mean you believe me now?" The officer hesitated. "We're still investigating," he said, before walking out again. Marcus felt a glimmer of hope, but he knew the battle wasn't over yet. Somewhere out there, people were standing up for him, and that gave him strength. The hours dragged on as Marcus sat alone in the interrogation room, his mind still spinning with disbelief. The police had taken him in, treated him like a criminal, and now it seemed like only the growing outrage from the public was getting their attention. He leaned back in the chair and sighed, staring at the bare walls. His body ached from the long wait, and the tension in his chest made it hard to focus on anything else. Meanwhile, outside the station, the situation was quickly escalating. The video of Marcus's arrest had gone viral, sparking heated discussions across the country. Social media was filled with posts from people expressing their shock and disbelief. A hashtag began trending, #FreeMarcusNow. Supporters flooded the internet with messages demanding his release, including prominent community leaders and even some celebrities. Everyone seemed to be asking the same question. Why was Marcus arrested for doing something good? Gregory, still in the hospital, couldn't stay still. The more he thought about it, the more he realized how unfairly Marcus had been treated. He was the one who had needed help, and Marcus had been the one to save him. Now Marcus was being held because of a misunderstanding. Gregory was determined to make things right. Gregory's family, who had been visiting him in the hospital, immediately began calling their contacts, reaching out to local news stations to make sure the truth was heard. Margaret, his wife, was the first to speak with the media. explaining what had happened from her husband's perspective. "That man, Marcus, was our hero," Margaret said in an interview. "He didn't hesitate for a second. He stayed with my husband while we waited for the ambulance. Now, they're arresting him as if he did something wrong. This isn't right." Her words spread quickly, reaching the ears of news anchors who now began covering the story from all angles. The public started to rally behind Marcus, demanding accountability from the police for what they saw as a gross injustice. Back at the police station, Marcus had been waiting for what felt like hours when the door opened again. This time, it was a higher-ranking officer wearing a crisp uniform, his face serious. "Marcus Reed?" the officer asked, looking at his notes. "That's me," Marcus replied, standing up. He had hoped for a quick resolution, but his instincts told him this wasn't going to be a simple conversation. The officer nodded, still looking at his notes. "We've been reviewing the situation," he began. "Your case has drawn a lot of attention. We've received statements from witnesses, including the man you helped." Marcus's heart skipped a beat. "Gregory?" The officer nodded. "Yes, Gregory. He's confirmed that you were simply trying to help. You're free to go." A wave of relief washed over Marcus, but before he could speak, the officer added, "However, there will be no formal apology. The department is conducting an internal review of the incident, but we're not admitting wrongdoing at this time." Marcus stood there, stunned. He had been freed, but the lack of accountability stung. "So I'm free," he said slowly, "but no one is going to take responsibility for this." The officer didn't respond. Instead, he simply motioned for Marcus to leave the room. As Marcus stepped out of the station, he could see reporters and photographers waiting outside, all eager to catch a glimpse of him. The public support was overwhelming, but Marcus felt a strange emptiness. He had been released, but the real work, making sure this kind of injustice didn't happen again, was just beginning. As Marcus stepped outside the police station, the bright flash of camera lights nearly blinded him. Reporters, news anchors, and curious onlookers surrounded the area. They had been waiting for hours, hoping to hear from the man who had been at the center of such an unusual story. The crowd buzzed with excitement, but Marcus felt more exhausted than ever. "Marcus, can we get a statement?" one reporter shouted. "Marcus, what do you think of the police handling of the situation?" another asked. Marcus paused for a moment, his thoughts still spinning. He had been freed, but the whole experience left a bitter taste in his mouth. The police had let him go, but they hadn't admitted any wrongdoing, and there was no real apology. The way he was treated, despite doing nothing but helping, was still haunting him. He raised his hand, signaling for silence. After a few moments, the noise quieted down enough for him to speak. "I don't know what to say," he began, his voice steady. "I was just trying to help a man who needed it. I've spent my whole life helping people in my community, and I never thought doing the right thing would lead to something like this." The reporters leaned in, their pens and cameras ready to capture his every word. Marcus continued, his frustration now clear in his voice. "Instead of being praised for helping a stranger, I was treated like a criminal. I was arrested, handcuffed, and made to feel like I did something wrong. All I did was stay with Gregory until help arrived. He's the one who needed help, not me." One reporter asked, "How does it feel to have so many people supporting you?" Marcus sighed. "It feels good to know that so many people believe in me. I appreciate the support, but this isn't just about me. It's about what happened. There's something wrong when a man can't help another man without being arrested. This shouldn't happen to anyone else." As he spoke, the crowd around him murmured in agreement. People held up signs with messages of support like #JusticeForMarcus and #KindnessNotCrime. The energy in the air was changing. What had started as a simple act of kindness had now turned into a cause that many wanted to stand behind. Inside the hospital, Gregory had heard about Marcus's release. He had been following the news on his phone and couldn't believe what he was seeing. The video, the interviews, the support. It was all happening so quickly. But Gregory wasn't surprised. He knew that Marcus was the kind of person who would stand up for what was right, no matter the cost. "Now we have to make sure this doesn't happen again," Gregory said, his voice weak but determined. He turned to his wife, Margaret. "I'm going to contact a lawyer. This isn't over. Marcus deserves an apology, and the police need to be held accountable for their actions." Margaret nodded, her face set with resolve. "We'll make sure this gets the attention it deserves." Back at the station, the police chief watched the news coverage of Marcus's statement. He couldn't help but feel uneasy. The public pressure was growing, and the case had sparked widespread conversations about fairness, justice, and the treatment of individuals in moments of crisis. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that this incident could not be swept under the rug. Marcus had no idea what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to let this go. The fight for justice had just begun. The next few days felt like a whirlwind for Marcus. He had never imagined that helping a stranger would lead to such a storm of attention. News stories, social media posts, and public debates filled every corner of his life. But no matter how much the world was talking about him, Marcus couldn't stop thinking about one thing: justice. He had been released from the police station, but no apology had come. He knew that a simple sorry wouldn't fix the situation, but it would be a start. The injustice of it all weighed heavily on him, and it wasn't something he could just forget. Gregory, too, was determined to make sure that Marcus didn't just become another forgotten story. He had spent the last few days working with a lawyer, making sure that the incident would be taken seriously. Gregory knew that what happened to Marcus could happen to anyone, and he couldn't let it slide. "I've been in the hospital for days," Gregory said to his wife, Margaret, as he sat on the edge of his bed. "But we need to push this forward. I can't just let them treat him like that without consequences." Margaret nodded. "I know. We'll do whatever it takes to get justice for him." The media coverage continued to grow, and soon, a large rally was organized in support of Marcus. People from all walks of life, both black and white, came together to demand accountability for the way he had been treated. The rally wasn't just for Marcus. It was a stand against the unfair treatment of people who tried to help others, regardless of their background. The rally took place in the same square where Marcus had helped Gregory. It was crowded with signs, banners, and voices chanting in unity. "Justice for Marcus," and "Kindness should never be a crime," echoed through the square. Marcus stood on the steps of the community center, his heart swelling with pride as he looked out at the sea of supporters. One of the speakers, a local activist, addressed the crowd. "This is not just about one man. It's about standing up for what's right. It's about showing the world that we will not let kindness go unpunished." Marcus felt a surge of emotion. He had never imagined something so simple, helping a stranger, would bring so many people together. Yet here they were, all united for the same cause. A few days later, Marcus received a call. It was from Gregory's lawyer. "We're making progress," the lawyer said. "The police department has agreed to meet with you to discuss what happened. It looks like they're finally taking this seriously." Marcus couldn't believe it. After everything that had happened, after all the pressure, the police were finally acknowledging the wrong that had been done. He agreed to meet with them, but he knew this wasn't the end. He wanted to make sure that what happened to him wouldn't happen again to anyone else. The meeting was set for the following week. Marcus, Gregory, and their lawyer sat in a small, quiet room, waiting for the police to arrive. There was still tension in the air, but Marcus felt hopeful. Change was coming, and this was just the beginning. When the police arrived, the room went quiet. The officers who had been involved in Marcus's arrest walked in, and Marcus's heart tightened. But this time, the atmosphere was different. The officers seemed more open, more willing to listen. "Mr. Reed," the police chief said, "we've reviewed everything, and we realize that this situation should have been handled differently. We are truly sorry for what you went through." Marcus nodded, still feeling a mix of emotions. "Apology accepted," he said, but his voice was firm. But it doesn't end here. This is about making sure that people are treated fairly, no matter who they are or where they come from. The following weeks were a turning point for Marcus. After the meeting with the police, there was a shift in the way people treated him. The officers had apologized, but Marcus knew that words alone wouldn't change things. It was going to take more than just an apology to make a real difference. He felt a responsibility to keep pushing, to make sure this situation wouldn't be forgotten. As news of the meeting spread, the public support for Marcus only grew stronger. People rallied behind him, and soon, organizations focused on justice and equality reached out to offer their help. They saw his story as a call to action for the changes that needed to happen in law enforcement practices and the treatment of everyday citizens. Gregory, still recovering in the hospital, was following everything closely. He couldn't wait to see Marcus again. The more he thought about it, the more he realized how lucky he was to have crossed paths with such a kind person. Without Marcus, he might not have made it. But now, he was determined to help Marcus the way Marcus had helped him. Once I'm out of here, we'll make sure no one else goes through what Marcus went through, Gregory told his wife, Margaret. This is bigger than us now. Margaret nodded. We need to use our voices too. What happened to Marcus could happen to anyone. Back in the square, where everything had begun, there was a sense of change in the air. Marcus returned to the community center where he worked, feeling proud but still focused on what came next. The rally, the protests, the media coverage, it had all shown him that there was power in speaking up. He had never imagined he would be at the center of something so big, but now that he was ready to use his voice for good. One afternoon, Marcus sat down with a group of activists who had reached out to him. They discussed ways to keep the conversation alive, to make sure that issues like racial profiling and unfair treatment were addressed in a meaningful way. They didn't want this moment to fade into the background, and neither did Marcus. We need to push for better training, for more accountability in law enforcement, Marcus said. We can't let this happen again. We can't let people be punished for simply doing the right thing. The group agreed, and plans began to form. They would start a campaign, raising awareness and demanding better treatment for everyone, regardless of their race or background. It was about fairness, about kindness, and about ensuring that people like Marcus wouldn't be treated like criminals for helping others. As the weeks passed, the momentum for change continued to grow. Gregory's condition improved, and he joined Marcus in speaking out at local events. Together, they shared their story with the public, using their voices to encourage others to stand up against injustice. And then, something unexpected happened. The police department announced a new initiative. They were going to implement better community outreach programs and sensitivity training for all officers. They acknowledged that what had happened to Marcus was a mistake and that they were committed to learning from it. It wasn't a perfect solution, and Marcus knew there was still much work to be done. But in that moment, he realized that the struggle for justice didn't end with one apology. It was the beginning of a much bigger change. As Marcus walked down the street, he felt a sense of peace. The road ahead would be long, but he wasn't walking it alone. The support from his community, from Gregory, and from everyone who believed in fairness was something he could carry with him forever. And that, to Marcus, was the true victory. As the weeks went by, things slowly started to settle. The rallies, the media coverage, and the public outcry had all brought the issue to light. Marcus could feel that something had shifted, not just in the way people saw him, but in the way the community viewed justice and fairness. The police department had taken steps to address the incident, but Marcus knew there was still more to be done. He wasn't interested in revenge. He just wanted change. He wanted to make sure that no one else would ever be treated the way he had been, simply for trying to help. Gregory, now fully recovered and back at home, had been working alongside Marcus to raise awareness. The two men had become close friends, their bond strengthened by the events that had unfolded. They both shared a determination to push for progress, and they knew their story could help others understand the importance of standing up for what's right. One evening, As they sat together in Marcus's living room, Gregory spoke with a thoughtful look on his face. "You know, Marcus, I've been thinking, we got a real opportunity here to make a difference. It's not just about our story, it's about changing things for everyone." Marcus nodded, feeling the weight of Gregory's words. "Yeah, it's about showing people that kindness should never be punished. It's about making sure that justice isn't just for some people, it's for everyone." Gregory smiled. "Exactly. We need to keep pushing for better training in law enforcement. We need to make sure that people aren't treated unfairly based on their race or background. And we need to remind everyone that kindness should always be celebrated, not questioned." The two of them spent the next few months traveling around the country, speaking at events, and sharing their story. They met people who had experienced similar injustices, and together they formed a network of support for those who felt overlooked or mistreated. Through it all, Marcus's message remained clear: stand up for what's right, no matter the cost. He knew that change wasn't easy, but he also knew that it was possible. And with every person who joined the cause, the more hopeful he became. One day, Marcus received a letter from the police department. It wasn't an apology this time. It was a formal invitation to join a new community advisory board that was being created to help guide the department in making improvements. The letter explained that the police had recognized the need for real change, and they wanted Marcus's input on how to move forward. Marcus felt a sense of pride as he read through the letter. It was a small step, but it was a step in the right direction. He agreed to join the board, knowing that his voice would be part of the process to ensure that others wouldn't face the same kind of injustice that he had. As time passed, the efforts to improve the police force's relationship with the community began to show results. More officers attended sensitivity training, and there was a noticeable shift in how the community was treated, especially in emergency situations. It wasn't perfect, but Marcus could see that things were improving. He knew that the fight for justice was ongoing, but he was proud of what had been accomplished. The road ahead would still have challenges, but Marcus wasn't walking it alone anymore. He had his friends, his community, and the support of countless people who believed in fairness. And that was enough to keep him going.